And now we're going to move to looking at a causal argument. We just looked at the effects argument, and let me pull up our causal. So as you've noticed throughout, I do use the current coronavirus pandemic to foreground or dig out all of the examples of the types of arguments we are writing in this class. Okay. Okay. So, like the other document, some of what I highlighted, a lot of it actually is gone, but that's okay. I can work with that. All right. So here we have a causes argument, and this one is predicated on what is driving President Trump and his conservative allies to push so hard to return to normalcy, despite warnings from medical experts that rushing too fast be bad for the economy, potentially, in that if more people get infected by COVID, people won't be returning to the normal world. They'll be sheltering even if there isn't an order in place. And also there will be more deaths. And that also will, beyond the scope of just having more deaths, which we certainly, never want to see people die from any kind of disease, but also those deaths then impact the economy because you have shifts in spending habits and shifts in the ability to produce, shifts in the ability to, transport. All of these economies are connected. And so having healthy members of society is important to maintaining the health of the economy. But let's go ahead and look at this title, right? Because again, we have a well-presented subject. Rather than looking at the effects, we're really looking at, for the most part, the causes. So Trump and his allies are worried about more than November. The temporary imposition of popular relief programs in response to the coronavirus makes Republicans nervous, right? So this is a really nice contrast. If you, again, think about having a colon after November here, the temporary imposition of popular relief programs is what Trump and his allies are worried about, more than just will he win in November, right? And so it begins to set the stage for what we're going to be learning about as this person views the causes for Trump's push to reopen. Okay, so we have another lengthy, well-presented subject. Let me see where we're at here. Yeah, okay. So in the face of mass employment and a rapidly contracting economy, President Trump is to end the pandemic lockdown and bring the country back online. Notice here that we have the president named in the first sentence. We have mass unemployment, rapidly contracting economy, pandemic, right? These are all key words that are conveyed to us in that initial sentence, so readers can pivot and understand the framework of what's going to be discussed, okay? And when this writer, who is Jamal Bowie, is an opinion columnist at the New York Times, so that he's a staff writer there, when he makes this claim, he supports it. That's why he spent the past week asserting his, quote, total authority to reopen the economy. And then here he actually has in text parenthetical citation here, right? And promising a rapid return to normal. Here another quote he said on Tuesday. So it's not just enough, right, to make a claim that somebody is desperate to do something or support something. You have to show evidence so that your readers can gain trust in you and assess it for themselves, right? You provide that evidence to us, to your audience, so that they can do their own level of analysis and connecting the dots, right? It's fact. It's not just an opinion here. That part is fact. Republicans in Congress, likewise, are urging an end to the freeze. Should have happened yesterday, right? So it's not just enough to say are urging an end to the freeze. You actually need to provide evidence to illustrate that fact, right? And so this whole paragraph here is about giving support to that topic sentence. They're urging an end, right? And you have that transition and the clear logic organization of using likewise to move from this paragraph's main idea about the president to this paragraph's main idea, which is Congress, which nicely ties into Trump and his allies, right? So notice how everything is connected. This is called coalition, that you hone in on a particular theme or idea, and then you use keywords to keep connecting it throughout the essay, which stylistically and rhetorically produces an effective argument, okay? So no doubt there is real concern. Here is actually the alternate, the considerations and alternate causes, okay? No doubt there is real concern for the economic and health consequences of an extended shutdown. And that's why we see here that this is what they're vocalizing in these first two paragraphs: economic and health consequences of an extended shutdown. So he's seeding, the writer, Bowie, is seeding the point. He's saying, yes, I admit this to be true. There are real concerns. He adds to these, right? But Republicans and Trump in particular are also thinking about November. If the president knows anything, it's that his fate rises and falls with the state of the economy. And he's also, if he falls, the congressional Republicans fall too, right? So it's not just about concerns related to the pandemic in terms of economic and health fallout, right? But it's also political fallout, that if Trump doesn't deliver on a strong economy, he's going to potentially lose those who have voted for him because of the strong economy, or that might have voted for him because of the strong economy that we had just 8 weeks ago, okay? And so this is offering concession and objection, that it's more than just that, right? He's saying, hey, there's more going on than what Republicans and Trump in particular are citing as their rationale. It's also November. Here he says, but I think there's another element underlying the push to reopen the economy, okay? And this is where we get to his view of what's causing this push to reopen the economy despite the threat it poses to American lives. And this is where we begin to look at the second part of the title, popular relief programs that have been enacted on the virus, right? Here it says, dynamic beyond partisanship that explains why much of the conservative political ecosystem has joined the fight to end the lockdown. And this is where it gets interesting, because this is a really surprising cause. You have the mainstream causes, right? Severe health and economic effects of continuing the lockdown. And then you have a more obvious kind of underlying cause, which is that the Trump and Republican allies want to win in November. But then Bowie's saying, no, but there's another more hidden cause that I'm going to point out. And that's where his insight is incredibly effective and thought-provoking, right? And that's what you want to do in a causes argument. You don't want to point out the obvious causes. he doesn't even bother, Bowie doesn't even bother to spend too much time on the November election, because that's an obvious cause. He points it out. It's important to point out, but he moves on, because the cause that he needs to really convince us about, the cause that he wants to take up to fight for in terms of his argument, is that Republicans and conservative allies, President Trump, don't want these temporary relief packages, which have served as social safety nets right now, to become the norm, because they've always railed against that. They've always thought of smaller government. They've always wanted to. They claim the dangers of social welfare systems. They call Democrats socialists. Sometimes, even though there is a distinction between socialists like Bernie Sanders, Democratic socialist, and socialism and Democrats, but socialism is a dirty word to Republicans and to President Trump and their allies. And so what we need to look at then is they've just agreed to some of these social welfare programs, and people are liking them, right? So here we have, he gives us some background, right, of the policies that typically would be criticized, right? And then in one short month, they made a significant leap toward a kind of emergency social democracy, right? Healthcare, economic aid, these are requiring the federal government to step in and provide a safety net, provide funding to the hospitals to pay for COVID testing and the treatment of COVID patients, funding of individuals and small businesses, right? Essentially that $1,200 payment that was incorporated into the CARES Act was a form of a basic income, a universal basic income, one of the policies that socialism advocates. So here we have then is that voters might begin to see an essential truth in democratic socialism, which is that we need it. As Americans, the society we live in today, perhaps a socially democratic form of government will produce a happier, more supported, healthier, and more economically stable electorate, right? And so this is something that they don't want Americans to think about, is this writer's argument. If the electoral danger for the Republican Party, here's the thesis, is that voters will blame the president for high unemployment and mass death, a reasonable fear given how Trump loudly denied the threat in the face of warnings from inside and outside his administration. So he says, electoral danger is this, if voters are gonna blame him for this, right? The ideological danger, meaning the worldview, the guiding beliefs, is that what's happened now finds the ideological project that captured the state, meaning the United States, when it began with President Ronald Reagan and is on the path to victory under Donald Trump. So what this means is that beginning with Ronald Reagan, he really saw social safety nets and social welfare programs as not helping those that they meant to help. And President Trump has advocated this belief and pushed it forward, right? And here we have some evidence, right? Republicans haven't openly expressed this, but they seem aware of it to the extent that on the eve of approval of the first coronavirus bill, they tried to kill the most generous provisions of relief, an enormous expansion of unemployment insurance. The reason? Here's the quote. The moment we go back to work, we cannot create an incentive for people to say, I don't need to go back to work because I can do better someplace else, right? In other words, we cannot help people so much that they can effectively bargain for better wages, right? They want to keep workers' wages low. Crisis or not, we must discipline the working class. So this is a way to, they don't want to dismantle the class system here that has been buoyed by low wages for workers. And there's evidence for this if you look at economies that the rate of salary increase for workers hasn't increased almost at all since the 1970s. It's the most wealthy. It's increased hundreds of times over, producing an incredible wealth gap, right? So there's no guarantee that Americans will respond to the pandemic and economic collapse with support for more and greater assistance, right? So this here is saying, yeah, it may not happen, but the possibility is there and it will become more apparent the longer this continues. If the rolling depressions of the late 19th century disrupted the social order enough to open the space for political radicalism. So here he then marks two: the Farmers Alliance, agrarian uprising, and industrial labor movement. Then the 1-2 punch of the Great Recession and the pandemic depression might do the same for us. So he's seeing going to history to offer an analogy for why he's able to argue for this cause for Donald Trump now, right? That it's very possible that Americans will rise up and say, no, we need more. And what that can do is make it so that some of the central tenets of what Republicans stand for, which is individualism, not relying on the federal government, working one's way up from the ground without assistance. They're saying no, more Americans might see the need for this, just as they saw it back in these earlier times in the late 19th century, all right? So in which case, it makes all the sense in the world for Trump, the Republican Party, and the conservative movement to push for the end of the lockdown. Public health be damned. So even if people, it doesn't matter. And it's not for re-election, it's not only for re-election, right? What he's saying is that after years of single-minded devotion, the conservative movement is achingly close to dismantling the New Deal political order and turning the clock back to when capital could act without limits or restraints, okay? So that means that what they've been doing is easing a lot of regulations and just canceling them out altogether, dismantling all of the departments, and by implementing interim heads, Trump is able to circumvent the congressional approval process by putting in people that will work with his goals in mind, rather than be vetted and qualified for these positions through both parties in the House and the Senate, okay? And all of this is happening as one of the most progressive generations in history begins to take its place in our politics, right? So just as you have, the younger Democratic members of Congress rising and senators rising, even local mayors, you're seeing that this kind of social welfare, safety net, democratic socialism has a real chance of being adopted, right? So yes, nothing is set in stone, and yes, events still have to unfold. But at this moment in American life, it feels as if one movement, a reactionary one, is beginning to unravel, and another, very different in its outlook, is beginning to take shape. So the cause for President Trump moving to reopen the economy so swiftly is in part due to the threat of progressive policy taking a foothold in American government at the federal and state levels. Okay, and so that's the cause offers for why Trump and his allies are pushing so hard. All right. So you get that well-presented subject. You offer he offers an excellent analysis. The effective response to objections or alternate causes and effects. It's just this paragraph, right? And then the transitions are really effective. Spoke about before. All right, so that basically concludes our look at a causal argument paper. Are there any questions or comments or thoughts? As you turn to thinking about your own papers that you begin to write this coming week, think about what's been really interesting to you, what makes you curious in terms of, oh, I wonder what caused that, right? Or I wonder what the effect of this particular moment has on the future. Or I wonder what effect, the No Child Left Behind policy had on children in K-12 who were subject to that, right? Or I wonder what the new curriculum that design is, I forget what it's called now for K-12, but it's the new math, it's all of the core, Common Core. I wonder how Common Core affects K-12. Alternatively, you could also look at what initially was the cause of wanting to begin online education when it first began, however many years ago, right? What is it that they were trying to accomplish there? Is there a hidden cause there, right? Or even today, what do you anticipate the effect to be of social or distance learning on college students, right? So there are lots of different avenues you can engage in. I do caution you that you want to move beyond the obvious, just as Bowie does. And so you want to make sure that you're really thoughtful, that you find something that you're passionate about, because you have to do a lot of digging, researching, and even reflection of your kind of synthesizing what you read, what you know, and what you're experiencing or what others have experienced. Okay? All right, well, have a great day, and I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.